Hello again, this is Mr. Weber, and this is video lecture number 2 for AP United States History, Tradition-Bound Europe. Today our lecture is going to look at 3 different sections. We are first going to look at European peasant society, and we're going to see what common life was like for everyday Europeans. We are also going to look at hierarchy and authority within Europe, so this is going to be a short examination of the power structures that existed in Europe. And we're finally going to look at the power of religion, and this is going to be important because religion does play an important role in the founding of the United States with these Europeans. So even before 1450, traditional European society was growing and changing. The population increased, farming techniques improved, and towns and trade expanded. Europe flexed its muscles by looking outward to the Holy Land, which it sought to re-Christianize by conquest, and they also looked to new trade routes in Africa and in the East. At the same time, many Europeans worked towards the spiritual purification of the continent. Much still remained, however. Much of it was traditional, and that included the ties of most people to the land and to the supremacy of the Christian faith. Secular rulers rose and fell, wars and anarchy occurred frequently, famine and disease remained an omnipresent threat, and the Black Death, or the bubonic plague, which was roughly 1347 to 1400, seemed to be an example of God's inexplicable ways. Social conditions changed everywhere, although not at the same time. The Renaissance, which began early in the 14th century in Italy, transformed Europe, and a transformed Europe discovered America. This rebirth or renewal of intellectual inquiry and human knowledge offered limitless possibility for learning and creativity. Renaissance humanism liberated Europeans from the spiritual and hierarchical dogmas of the past. It celebrated secular and individual characteristics, willpower, activity, and the unlimited potential of human nature, creative talent, and virtue. And by virtue, Italian scholars meant the application of the manly powers in the secular pursuits of war, statecraft, and the arts. In his account of a fictional utopia, Sir Thomas More combined a critique of the old world with an imaginative projection on the possibilities of the new. John Hales objected to what he and many other commentators perceived to be the principal source of economic and social distress in the early modern world. So let's go ahead and begin and look at our different sections. We're going to start with the first one being European peasant society. In 1450, most Europeans were peasants living in small rural communities of compact agricultural villages, which were oftentimes surrounded by open fields. Cooperative farming was a necessity because of the lack of available land. Most farm families exchanged their surplus farm products with their neighbors, or they bartered it for local services due to things like poor roads and poor transportation systems. Most peasants yearned to be yeomen, owners of small farms that provided a marginally comfortable living. But few actually achieved that goal due to exploitation by landlords. As with Native American cultures, many aspects of European life followed a seasonal pattern. Even European birth and death patterns appear to have been seasonal, and this indicates the profoundly rural nature of peasant existence. Mortality rates among the peasants were high, primarily from disease. Hunger, disease, and violence were part of the fabric of everyday life. Although most peasants accepted their difficult circumstances, others hoped for a better life. The deprived rural classes of Britain, Spain, and Germany would eventually supply the majority of white migrants to the Western Hemisphere. Of course, this all occurred during the colonial period. So let's move to the next section, hierarchy and authority, and let's look at some of the power structures and some of the ways that the Europeans organized themselves in terms of their authority. In the traditional European social order, authority came from above. Kings and princes owned vast tracts of land, they conscripted men for military service, and they lived in splendor off of the labor of the peasantry. Collectively, noblemen who possessed large landed estates had the power to actually challenge royal authority through control of the local military and legislative institutions. Domestically, the man ruled his women and children. His power was codified in laws and sanctioned by social custom and justified by the teachings of the Christian church. On marriage, an English woman assumed her husband's surname and was required to submit to his orders. She also surrendered to her husband her legal right to all her property. When he died, she would receive a dower, which is 1/3 of the family's property for her use during her lifetime. The inheritance practice of primogeniture, which bestowed all land on the eldest son, forced many younger children to form the ranks of the roaming poor. Few men and even fewer women had much personal freedom or individual identity. Fathers often demanded that children work for them until their mid-20s. Hierarchy and authority through family, church, and village prevailed because they offered a measure of social order and security. These values shaped the violent and unpredictable and eventual American social order well into the 18th century. So, the next section, we'll look at the power of religion. The Roman Catholic Church served as one of the great unifying forces in Western European society. The church provided a pervasive authority and discipline through Christian dogma, a church staffed by priests in every village, and the unifying language of Latin. Like the Indians of North America, European peasants were originally pagans, and they were also animists. They believed that unpredictable spiritual forces governed the natural world, and that those spirits had to be paid ritual honor. The church attacked paganism by devising a religious calendar that transformed pagan agricultural festivals into Christian holy days. Christian doctrine penetrated the lives of peasants. To avert famine and plague, Christians offered prayers to Christ and to the saints. Crushing other religions and suppressing heresies among Christians was an obligation of rulers and a task of the new order of Christian knights. Between 1096 and 1291, successive armies of Christians embarked on crusades. Muslims were a prime target of the crusaders. Christians also persecuted pagans who believed in polytheism for heresy. The Crusades strengthened this Christian identity of Europe, and it helped to broaden the intellectual and economic horizons of the European privileged class. Military successes against Islamic peoples and the absorption of Arab knowledge also enabled European elites to set out to capture Arab-dominated trade routes. And these routes stretched from Constantinople to Beijing and from the Mediterranean to the East Indian Seas. So this does conclude then our section, our second video lecture, Tradition Bound Europe. Please address the review questions that you see now at the bottom, and be sure to read the accompanying text.